David Lepofsky. I'm co-chair of the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. To my right is Mr. Gord Dingle, who is our regional contact for the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee and regional group in Sarnia, Ontario. To my left is Ms. Louise Bark, who's a regional contact for the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee in Kingston, the other end of the province. Further to my left, your right, is David Baker, counsel with the Advocacy Resource Centre for the Handicapped, or off to the side, I gather.
Off the side. She just
Falling off the stage, but hiding over there is David Baker, who's legal counsel to our coalition. Let me begin. We came to Queen's Park today in the face of enormous doubt. During the last election, Premier Mike Harris promised three things to our coalition in writing. He promised first that in his first term he would enact the Ontarians with Disabilities Act. 3.5 years into his term, there's no act passed, there's no bill introduced. A lot of promises, but no action. He promised in writing as well that he would work together with our coalition to develop that law. It's a unique kind of promise for a political leader to name the specific group he will work with to develop a specific law. Since the election, he has repeatedly, consistently, and in writing, refused to even meet with us. He delegates us to ministers to talk to, but those ministers are given marching orders and really have no discretion or option on what they can do or what they can say. Third, he promised during the last election that he would devote new resources, new money, to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities who are seeking a barrier-free Ontario. Instead, over 3.5 years, he has slashed funding to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities. Let there be no mistake. The 1.5 million Ontarians with disabilities are far worse off now than they were 3.5 years ago. Government bragging to the contrary. So we came to Queen's Park today full of enormous doubt. We don't believe that the government means business because they've delayed, because they've stalled, because they deferred their consultation process till a time when they hoped that nobody would be around to respond, and because they embarked on this summer's consultation for this legislation by pre-announcing their core policy goals. They already decided what the Ontarians with Disabilities Act would look like, and they put it in their discussion paper. In that discussion paper, they said that this law in the important area of employment, if not elsewhere, will be voluntary, not mandatory. Have you ever heard of a voluntary law before? Imagine how safe your homes would be if there was a voluntary murder law. Imagine how safe our streets would be if there was a voluntary law against violence. People with disabilities deserve better. The Premier also, through his discussion paper, announced that this do-nothing new law would not only be voluntary, but would have no new enforcement agency or enforcement mechanisms. Enforcement is where we see whether a law means business. So we were full of doubt, but we actively participated in the consultation, and during that process, across the province, even though the government tried to close the hearings, limit the participants, cram them into rooms where there wasn't enough time to talk, and keep secret the results, as well as the invitation list, as long as they could. People with disabilities, through their spokespeople, 1.5 million people with disabilities across Ontario, speaking through their representatives across Ontario, united around 11 core principles. And those principles together demand a strong and effective Ontarians with Disabilities Act. One that with teeth, one that is meaningful, and one that will achieve our goal of a barrier-free Ontario for all people with disabilities. Well, we united over that message, but the government still didn't listen. As recently as last week, when our representatives met with the minister with the marching orders, Isabel Bassett, we found out that, and Derwin Shea confirmed it today, they're still analyzing the results of the consultation, but they've already engaged Legislative Counsel, the very person responsible for drafting the law. This law is being drafted or is already written, even though they haven't finished even looking at what the consultation says and what people had to say to them. So we were full of enormous skepticism and enormous doubt, and we had every reason to be. So, fearing that we were that we would receive either no bill at all or a smoke and mirrors do-nothing bill, a bill with voluntary measures, not mandatory requirements for a barrier-free Ontario, a bill with no enforcement mechanism rather than a strong and effective and fair enforcement mechanism that treats business fairly, government appropriately, but gives people with disabilities a voice. Fearing that that's what we were up against, we decided a novel parliamentary tactic, and it worked. We had an opposition member of the legislature, Dwight Duncan, introduce a resolution into the House, debated and voted on today, which calls on the government in unequivocal terms to enact an Ontarians with Disabilities Act that is meaningful, that is strong and effective, that has teeth, and that embodies the 11 principles that people with disabilities from one end of this province to the other united around during the consultation that the government doesn't want to listen to. We came here today to find out, going door to door to MPP's offices, to find out, put simply, whether the Ontarians with Disabilities Act would be a trick or a treat. If the government had defeated this resolution, they would be declaring that the ODA, the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, would be a joke. If the government voted in favor of the resolution, as they did, they are declaring that the policy decisions announced in their discussion paper from last summer is a joke. This resolution contradicts and totally undermines the policy position of the Ontario government, of the Harris government, set out in their discussion paper from last summer. The two cannot stand together. Having passed this resolution unanimously, every Conservative in the legislature who attended to vote rose in favor of this resolution. They have united with the opposition parties. The backbench of the Conservative Party has united with the opposition parties to declare that the policy intentions of Mike Harris for the Ontarians with Disabilities Act is wrong. It's not good enough, and people with disabilities, 1.5 million strong, deserve better. Where do we go from here? Well, the real answer is not on this desk, but is on the desk of Mike Harris. Mike Harris gave Isabel Bassett and her cabinet marching orders last summer that we were to have a do-nothing smoke and mirrors bill. The legislature has unanimously declared that 1.5 million Ontarians deserve better. It's back on Mike Harris's desk, the very man who's refused to meet us, even though he promised in the last election to work with us. He's got to go back to the drawing board, and fast, because his term of office is out. We call on him to agree to meet with us now. We call on him to rescind the discussion paper policy decisions that guarantee an Ontarians with Disabilities Act that will be a joke. We call on him to direct his ministry to develop fast and effectively a strong and effective Ontarians with Disabilities Act that complies with the 11 principles that not only people with disabilities have united around, but the legislature has now united around. These members of the legislature, opposition and government alike, are the ones who have to face the voters, and 1.5 million Ontarians with disabilities is a lot of voters. They're voters that the government can't ignore any longer. The cabinet and the premier are obviously out of touch with what the people want, and they seem to be out of touch with what their backbenchers are prepared to vote for. Let me just conclude with an important point. We listened very carefully. 170 or more people with disabilities, blind people, deaf people, people with brain injuries, people with developmental challenges, people with MS, people with every kind of disability you can imagine. We listen to this debate, as will Ontarians across the province, people who have a disability now, 1.5 million strong, and the rest of Ontarians who will have a disability sometime in their life and who will need this law strong and effective just as much. We listened to what the government MPPs said, but we also watched how they voted. To people with disabilities, talk isn't cheap. Talk is worthless. It's the vote that matters. So whether the government's parliamentary secretary declares uncertainty about parts of the resolution, though he didn't say what, The reality is he voted for it, not in principle, not as a starting point. He voted for it. Voters in his riding, voters in all the MPP's ridings will be watching to make sure that the Ontarians with Disabilities Act that he and his colleagues voted for, the one the Premier gives us, meets and complies with these 11 principles. That's what this legislature has unanimously declared. That is what the Premier must do, and that is what we continue to offer to assist the government to achieve. I'd be pleased to take your questions, and we're expecting that there may be some MPPs present at some point who will be prepared to.
David, it's Dwight. There's 3 of us here, myself, Dalton McGinty, and Francis Lanka.
What we'd like to do before we take your questions is we've agreed that both opposition parties could have 5 minutes each to respond themselves and to divide it among their members and leader as they see fit. And so perhaps we'll just ask the Liberal Party first if they'd like to just make a statement. I'm not timing it, but if we could keep it within 5 minutes, that would be great.
Dalton's going to do that. David.
Evict you here momentarily. Thank you. David, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for your support.
My pleasure. I won't take nearly the 5 minutes. I'm just here to make it perfectly clear that I am pleased to be here today in support of David Lepofsky and in support of the Ontarians with Disability Act. Dwight Duncan today put forward a resolution in the legislature which was unanimously supported. I am pleased to report. My only disappointment, David, is that there is not sitting at this table the Minister for the Government presenting a bill abiding by the principles outlined in today's resolution. You have articulated the challenges most capably, as usual. We have a government that's made a commitment to moving forward with this legislation. It has refused to do so to date. Time is quickly passing us by. The Premier has found time to travel the province on his pre-campaign tour, but apparently has not been able to make a real priority when it comes to passage of this legislation. So we will be pressing the case as we have been in the past, and we are pleased to support this legislation. If Mike Harris chooses to either not introduce a bill or to introduce a bill which is not in keeping with the principles, that I want you to understand that a Dalton McGuinty government will introduce such a bill.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your support.
Pleasure. Francis Lankin is also.
David?
I want to thank you also for the support of your party for this resolution today.
Well, thank you. And I guess on behalf of our caucus, our thanks really goes to the members of the ODA Committee and all of the on-the-ground people of the community who have worked so hard to make their voices heard and to get this message across to the government. I found it interesting that the government members who were there and who voted today are the same members who have supported this government in cuts to supports with persons with disabilities, in cuts to programs that remove barriers, in the abolition of employment equity laws that had strong provisions, mandatory provisions. I think that it is imperative that the legislation that comes forward is a legislation that includes strong mandatory provisions for employment as well as for other aspects of the law. And that will be the judge, that will be the test of whether or not this government is going to live up to Mike Harris's commitments. We will continue, as we have done, David, over the last number of years working with you, to push the Premier to meet with you. I think he needs to hear firsthand from persons from the ODA community the support that is there, and that you will not accept a bill that falls short. You will not accept a bill as articulated in the government's discussion paper, that it doesn't make the mark. And I know Howard is on his way. If he doesn't make it in time, let me say that his commitment is clear in terms of our party's support for this legislation and to introduce this legislation ourselves. So
thank you very much. We really appreciate your support.
Thank you.
David, do you have anything to say about the fact that none of the cabinet members were present, and especially Isabel Bassett was not there today?
I certainly do. The government's got a problem. The government's got a really big problem because they planned and probably finished writing a Do-Nothing Smoke and Mirrors Act, and yet they don't want to face the consequences of that. So what do? We met with Isabel Bassett a week ago and presented this resolution and asked whether she'd be here, whether she'd vote, whether she'd commit her party's support. You see the results. She's not here. She faxed us a letter last night at 6 o'clock, which said nothing about the resolution and just echoed the same rhetoric we've seen over and over again. But she made it clear at our meeting last week that, frankly, she had been given parameters at the start of the consultation. And no matter what anyone said to her, she was stuck with those parameters. In fact, we're still mourning today the death of the former Chief Justice of Canada, the Honourable Brian Dixon. He met with her at her invitation last summer. No greater legal authority could be consulted, in my view, and in Ms. Bassett's view. And yet, when he told her that this legislation should be compulsory, should be mandatory, her answer to us last week is, but I have the parameters I was given. They're in the discussion paper, and that's that. So that we think that the absence of Ms. Bassett, well, it may not be traditional for ministers to come to private members' hours. There's, as far as I know, nothing prohibiting it, bespeaks the fact that the plan for smoke and mirrors legislation is still on the go. What now is going to be significant is that members of her own caucus who came here today and voted in favor of this resolution are going to have to go to Ms. Bassett and to Mr. Harris and to say that the Parliament has spoken. They got to change their plans. It's time to do an Ontarians with Disabilities Act that's going to comply with these principles. They can't hide any longer. And so, and we advised Ms. Bassett a week ago that we thought her presence here would be a signal of the kind of leadership that we could expect in the area of this legislation. Her absence here, I think, tells us exactly how much leadership we're getting. I should indicate, by the way, that what you've... Two things. The first is that at Queen's Park today, we have the head count that was provided to me in the range of 170 or more individuals with disabilities, not only from Toronto, but as the representation at this table shows, from as far as Kingston to Sarnia. We also have planned activities going on in other parts of the province, from Windsor to St. Catharines, to North Bay, to Guelph. And we are putting the heat, frankly, on MPPs in all corners of the province. And these are folks who've got to go out and face the voters. The other, and that's frankly why I think this resolution is passed, not because the government planned to comply with it, but now they're going to have to. The other thing that I want to indicate is that you'll note that the people who were at Queen's Park with us today were in 3 committee rooms on the ground floor. We brought our own sign interpreters, we brought our own support attendant care, and so on. We had to do this all ourselves. We didn't go to the public gallery because the public gallery can only accommodate a small number of people with disabilities. And as an act of solidarity, we felt that if we can't all go in the public gallery, none of us will. What greater symbol of the need for new, strong legislation for a barrier-free society than the absolutely cruel irony that people with disabilities can't even get into the public gallery to watch debate on how to make our society more accessible. That's why a voluntary do-nothing bill, like the Premier's planning and probably finished drafting, is just not good enough, and why this resolution is going to require more. Can we take other questions?
Yeah, in case of the government doesn't introduce the bill before the next election, are you formally ask the disabled people to boycott or not to vote for this government?
We are going to do whatever we can to get an Ontarians with Disabilities Act passed during this term that is strong and effective. We will certainly not be satisfied if we're just given a blank piece of paper with the words Ontarians with Disabilities Act or a do-nothing bill. If it's inadequate, we'll demand that it be improved and amended before it's passed. If it is not done at all, or if it's inadequate at the end of the term, we are a nonpartisan coalition of individuals and organizations from across the province, and we intend to bring to the attention of the public in as many ridings as we can who voted for a strong and effective Ontarians with Disabilities Act and who voted against them. People haven't talked about the votes of people with disabilities before, but they're going to talk about it in the next election. We're 1.5 million strong, and the disability vote is going to count. Other questions?
I think that's it, David.
Okay. Thank you all very much for coming, and à la prochaine.
Bye, David.
Thanks, David. It's great.